everyone, in today's video we're going to do our first Halloween nail because the previous two Halloween videos were jewelry. I figured start out the month with jewelry because then if you make them, you have the whole month to wear them. But now we're actually going to get into the nail art of Halloween, and we're going to do something that looks a little bit like this guy. We're going to do an encapsulated skull. The cool thing with doing an encapsulated skull is it is a great nail art upsell in a salon because it is completely smooth, and I know a lot of people don't like to wear nail art that is bumpy. Some people do. Some people are like, yeah, give me all the 3D, let's do something crazy. Most people, however, are like, ooh, but what if it feels funny? What if it catches on my hair? What if it feels when I put my hand in my pocket? So in that circumstance, and you have somebody that loves the look of 3D but not the feel of 3D, an encapsulated design like this skull is a perfect upsell. Or if you just want to practice around with it like I do, a great example as well. So fun, such a cool technique. I love doing it. If you want to practice, definitely follow along with this video. Otherwise, watch it just for the heck of it. I'd love for you to do that as well. I hope you like it, and I will see you all next time. Bye!
I'm going to begin by applying my nail form. I'm going to take the finger part out and stick that underneath, sticky side up. I'm going to close the end of my form and I'm going to fit it on the nail. If you want a very in-depth video on fitting forms onto very long nails or fitting forms for very long nails, I do have a video dedicated just to that, and I can direct you to that in the description box below. Otherwise, here we go. We've got our nail form applied. I'm going to close all of the tabs on the bottom, make sure it's nice and straight, and because this is on my practice finger, add another piece of tape to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. Now with clear acrylic, I'm going to sculpt the very thinnest base possible just to smooth the free edge of the nail, and you would do this on a natural nail or on a practice finger, down onto the nail form so there isn't a big bump. After I've got that little bit blended, I'm going to sculpt the skinniest little bit of clear acrylic for the length of the nail. I am not trying to smooth this out. I'm not trying to create any sort of shape or structure here, just a little thin platform. Once I have that thin platform, I'm going to take purple acrylic and I'm going to apply it over the nail in a very thin layer. If this was on top of a natural nail, I would take the clear acrylic all the way up in a very thin little brushed layer over the top of the entire nail plate to help with adhesion. But this is a practice finger, so I did skip that step. However, again, real person, make sure you do have that little layer of clear acrylic to protect the nail from the pigment of the purple as well as help with adhesion. Now that I've got my thin layer of purple, I'm going to remove this nail form. It is so very thin that when you remove the nail form, it's very easy to break it. So be very careful as you remove that form. I just don't like working with the form there. I feel like it, I don't know, changes my view of the nail. It kind of gets in the way of my vision, even though it really doesn't. It's, you know, perception. Now that I've got that off of there, I'm going to take white acrylic and I'm going to begin sculpting my skull. Just like the other layers, keep it thin. Everything about this you want to try to keep as thin as possible. All of your strength and all of your shape will come when you encapsulate your skull later. So this skull that you're sculpting right now, if it's too thick, when you go to file the nail, you're going to file layers and details off of your skull. So try to keep everything extremely thin. The first layer of the skull that I'm sculpting, I'm going to sort of use a dotting tool to carve out the eyes and the nail cavity, or not nail, nasal cavity. I'm going to, again, this is just a base layer. I'm going to add more to my skull. I'm going to add more height to it. It is going to look 3D. The first layer that you do, consider it like a first coat on a painting. If you were to do a painting, this is just the very beginning layer. You want to get the shapes in. You want to find where the eyes are. You want to find where the nose is, teeth, jawbone, etc. You don't want to really worry about the height. Right now, you're really just concerned about the shape, making sure you have a layer of white over everywhere that the skull is. I'm going to take the dotting tool the same way, carve out that little bit for the nasal cavity, remove that little bit of extra dangly acrylic that was sticking out there. When you do use your dotting tool to carve in this way, make sure that you first dip it into some acrylic powder. Since I am using white for my skull, I'm using white acrylic powder. If you're doing any other color, you want to make sure you're using a color to dip your dotting tool in that is complementary or clear. I am now going to start sculpting in some of those details on the jaw. If you wanted to do a partial skull without that lower mandible on, you could skip this part, especially if this was going to be a smaller or a shorter nail. I would probably do that just because you get the skull image without having that lower jaw in place. And it does take away a lot of the length and the necessary just bulk of the nail. So if this is on a shorter nail, which I would consider pretty much all my clients to have considerably shorter nails than this, then that would be a way to do it where you wouldn't have to worry about how long the nail is quite as much. I'm going to sculpt the bottom all the way across, and then I'm going to take and I'm going to sculpt the teeth in eventually, but I'm going to leave that to set and cure for a little while first. I am now going to go through with additional layers of acrylic and build up the height of the skull in areas that are going to be pulled forward. The best way to do this when you're thinking about which areas need to be taller is to look at views of a skull from multiple angles. Look at a skull that you have that's like my little skeleton friend. You probably don't have a real human skull just sitting on your desk, but if you happen to have a Halloween skull decoration, and just look at which areas are bumped out and stick out. So that's going to be around the eyes, the brow bone, and then the cheekbones, and then also at the very tip of the nose, the top of the nose, between the eyes, where the bridge of your nose sits before your nose turns to cartilage. Those are the first areas that I'm going to say are the most important to bring forward when you're doing this. After that, there's also a little line on the side of the skull, so I'm going to add a little more acrylic to the center of the skull to sculpt that line in on the sides where there's a slight indent. We've got that. I'm also going to take and I'm going to jut the chin out a little bit. Now, the majority of this area of the skull that is thickest, which is going to be around the eyes and the nose, is right also in the part of the nail where it's a little thicker. That's where the natural nail kind of dips down, the nail kind of carries it out. There's a little bit extra space there. So you have room to add a little extra height. However, closer to the end of the nail, the tip of the nail where we've got the chin, there's going to be less room to add thickness. So depending on how thick the base of your nail started out, if your background color ended up a little thicker, if the clear acrylic layer that you started to create the base of the nail was a little thicker, maybe the chin can't be as thick. It's all a balance, and you kind of figure it out as you go. So I'm now going to add a little bit more detail to my teeth area of my skull, again bringing that up a little bit, adding thickness. The other thing to consider is the center of the nail, so going down from, like, if you were to split the nail in two, from left to right, that's also where you can have more thickness. On the very edges, it's going to want to file off. It's going to be thinner. So all of this is, kind of finding that balance, figuring out where you can place acrylic so that it won't get filed away and your design won't get impeded by the final shape of the nail when you go to shape it. So just go through and do what you can. I'm going to sculpt in my teeth very gently, just with the tip of my brush, just swiping through them to create a little bit of a toothy texture. Add a little bit more to that jaw just to brighten it up. The great thing with this white acrylic I have, sometimes great, sometimes irritating, is that the more acrylic I add, the brighter the white is, and that's pretty much going to be the case with any white acrylic. So you also get some shading that's just built in based on how thin some of these areas are. With black acrylic, I am going to add more shading, however, to this. I'm going to fill in the eyes and the nose to start with, and then using incredibly thin black acrylic, that's the texture almost of paint, I'm going to be applying that in a wash over certain areas to bring out the textures that were sculpted in, especially over the teeth, kind of on the sides of the skull a little bit, add some shading, bring that back a little bit, around the top of the brow bone, and then a little shading just around the nail. So I'm going to darken right along the cuticle area and then just a little bit on the tip of the nail as well, just to add some shading and kind of make the skull look like it's pushed out farther. That's going to add to the 3D effect. And now you have to encapsulate this once you're all done with all of your sculpting. So I'm going to take clear acrylic and very carefully press it into the design. As you can see, I'm really pressing it into each of those areas, taking it one section at a time so that I don't have any air bubbles. If you don't really press the acrylic into the areas, especially the eyes and the nose and around the mouth, it is going to create little air bubbles. So you want to use thinner acrylic than you may normally for a overlay, and then you're going to take it piece by piece and really, I can't stress enough, press it into those shapes. Once you have it all where there's a layer of clear acrylic over the whole nail, then you can go back through and you can perfect the shape of it, add an apex in. The first bit of acrylic was just to make sure that your skull was coated properly to avoid air bubbles or smudging or any of those things. Once you are looking at this and you're like, yeah, he looks good, he is fully encapsulated, there's no weird areas that are left over, and make sure you do look at it from all angles, because on the side walls of the nail, there can definitely be some weird areas that you have to carefully fill in with acrylic. You can go ahead and file this nail into shape. As you are filing on an encapsulated any design, take it a little slower than you would on a different nail. That doesn't necessarily mean turn your e-file speed down. That might mean use a finer grit bit. So instead of using a medium grit, use a fine grit bit. That's going to slow down the filing process, make you take a little bit more time and really pay attention to where you're filing and to make sure you aren't filing all the way through into the design. And if you do happen to start filing through into the design, like I did just a little bit on my cheekbones, as long as you're being careful not to go too far where you're removing details, it is okay that the color, the white acrylic, is poking through the clear. It's not going to hurt anything. You just don't want to take it too far where you say file off a brow bone or something where it's like, oh no, I lost an important piece now. I'm going to hand file it afterwards to really just perfect it and take away the risk of overfiling, buff it, cleanse it with some acetone to smooth out any of those little ridges that may have been created by any of the files, and then apply a layer of top coat. I do recommend a glossy top coat over the top of an encapsulated design because it does help with the clarity of the clear so that you can see the design clearly. It does not photograph as well because you have all of those reflection marks, but in person it does look much better with a gloss than a matte. That's the final design. Like I said, I can't tell you enough how much this is a great upsell in a salon, especially if you have clients that have shown interest in doing some fun like 3D stuff, but just aren't really sure. It's a great kind of like ease them into it. I hope you like it, and I will see you all next time. Bye!